Morris smiled, touched by Bridget's warmth. "Thank you, sweetheart," he said. Quinn, his 19-year-old son, grinned from across the table. "Don't start crying, old man. We got a whole night of embarrassing stories ahead." Morris chuckled, shaking his head. "Just remember, I know stories about all of you too." The air was light, but beneath it he sensed tension, small undercurrents in every gesture. Loretta gestured toward the beautifully set table. "Let's sit down. I ordered your favorite, steak and roasted potatoes." She flashed that practiced smile again, and Morris played along, grateful for her effort, if nothing else. As they settled in, Bridget poured wine for everyone except Quinn, who eyed it longingly. "You can wait 2 years, buddy," Morris teased as he lifted his glass. "To Dad," Bridget toasted. "To Dad," Quinn and Loretta echoed. The clink of glasses rang out, a brief moment of unity. Yet, as the meal began, Morris wondered about the text message. Was it nothing? A prank? Or was there something beneath the surface tonight? Something waiting to emerge? There was something calculated in Loretta's eyes, something Morris recognized from the corporate sharks he'd encountered throughout his career. Quinn, now 20, hung back, his hands in his pockets. The boy had always been quieter, more reserved, especially after Morris had refused to fund his experimental film career and insisted he study business instead. "Let's eat," Morris said, taking his seat at the head of the table. The dinner proceeded with stilted small talk about Quinn's college courses and Bridget's new position at Thorndike and Wyatt, a prestigious law firm. Loretta mentioned her charity work, though Morris knew she'd been spending more time at the country club than with any actual charities. After the housekeeper, Miss Abernathy, brought in a small cake, Loretta excused herself and returned with an envelope. "We have something special for you this year," she said, placing it before him. Morris opened it, expecting perhaps tickets to a sporting event or a fishing trip, something obligatory. Instead, he found divorce papers. "What is this?" he asked, though he understood immediately. "It's time," Loretta said simply. 25 years is enough." Before he could respond, Bridget placed another envelope beside the first. "This is from me and Quinn." Inside were legal documents, property transfer papers with his signature, except Morris had never signed them. "Your signature is on the transfer," Bridget explained, her voice professionally detached. "The house, the vacation properties, they're all in our names now. It's been in process for months." "I never signed these," Morris said quietly. "Yes, you did," Quinn finally spoke. "Remember all those documents for the business restructuring? You should read what you signed, Dad." Morris felt a cold realization wash over him. The business restructuring. Hundreds of pages he had trusted his family to prepare. Pages he'd signed without thorough review because they were family. "There's more," Loretta said, producing a third envelope. "An eviction notice. Legally, you have 30 days, but we'd prefer if you left tonight. It's ours now, legally. Get out." Bridget's professional veneer cracked as she laughed. "Happy birthday, loser." Morris looked between the 3 faces he'd loved most in the world. He'd sacrificed everything for them. His time, his youth, his dreams. Now they stared back with cold victory in their eyes. He nodded slowly and stood. "Understood," he replied, his voice betraying nothing of the ice forming in his veins. He walked to the coat closet, retrieved his overcoat, and took his keys from the silver dish on the entry table. Outside, he made one call. "Terrence," he said when the line connected. "It's happening. Initiate Protocol 0. Then he walked to his car, got in, and drove away without looking back at the house he'd built with his own success. What his family didn't know, what they couldn't possibly understand, was that Morris Blackwell had spent a lifetime preparing for betrayal, and they had just triggered a mechanism they would soon desperately wish to undo. 3 months earlier, Morris had noticed the first threads of betrayal. It began with an accounting irregularity flagged by his CFO, Beatrice Wells. Several large transfers from the company's discretionary fund had been authorized using Morris's security credentials, but he had no recollection of approving them. "The system logs show the approvals came from your home IP address," Beatrice explained, showing him the documentation. "Late-night sessions, mostly weekends." Morris nodded, keeping his face impassive. "I'll look into it." That night, he installed monitoring software on the home network. Within 2 weeks, he had his answer. Loretta accessed his home office regularly when he worked late. She had somehow obtained his passwords. Rather than confront her, Morris watched and waited. He discovered Loretta had been in contact with Franklin Drummond, a rival security firm owner who had tried to buy out Riverstone Industries multiple times over the years. Morris had always refused. The pieces began falling into place. Loretta wanted out of the marriage, but with a golden parachute. Drummond wanted his company. His children wanted his wealth without the burden of his expectations. Morris modified his approach. He began leaving falsified documents where Loretta would find them. Documents suggesting Riverstone was worth far more than it actually was, with client contracts that didn't exist, and profit projections that were wildly optimistic. He watched as Loretta took the bait, photographing the documents late at night and sending them to someone whose number Morris traced back to Drummond. Meanwhile, Bridget had returned home after law school, claiming she wanted family time before starting her job. Morris now understood she had come to facilitate whatever legal maneuvers they were planning. "Dad, I've been thinking about the future of Riverstone," she said one evening over drinks in his study. "Have you considered creating a family trust to protect the assets?" "I have people who handle those matters," Morris replied. "But wouldn't you rather keep it in the family?" she pressed, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "I could draft something for you to review." Morris nodded thoughtfully. "That's not a bad idea. Why don't you work something up?" Over the next weeks, he signed various documents Bridget prepared. Each time, he made a show of skimming them, while secretly marking them with an invisible ink that would only appear under specific light conditions, a security measure from his military days that few knew about. Quinn became part of the scheme too, though more reluctantly. Morris observed him copying files from the home computer system one evening, his face lined with worry as he glanced over his shoulder. When confronted, Quinn claimed he was gathering material for a school project on corporate structures. Morris pretended to believe him. As his 50th birthday approached, Morris noticed increased activity, hushed phone calls, secretive meetings, and a flurry of legal paperwork. He knew they were closing their trap. 2 weeks before his birthday, he received confirmation of what he already suspected. Terrence Galloway, his oldest friend and the head of digital security at Riverstone, showed him intercepted emails between Loretta and Drummond. "They're planning to force you out," Terrence said, his face grim. "Drummond gets the company. Loretta gets half its value plus alimony, and your kids get the properties. They've forged your signature on multiple documents." Morris nodded. "And the timeline?" "Your birthday," Terrence replied. "They think it's poetic." "Indeed," Morris agreed. "Poetic." That night, Morris finalized his own plans. He had spent decades building secret contingencies, not just for business threats, but for personal ones as well. He'd watched his own father lose everything to betrayal, and he had vowed never to be so vulnerable. Protocol Zero was his ultimate contingency plan, a comprehensive response to total betrayal. It would activate a cascade of legal, financial, and personal countermeasures that would be unstoppable once initiated. As he stared at the final preparations on his computer screen, Morris felt a strange calm. Chess had taught him that sometimes you must sacrifice pieces to win the game. He was prepared to sacrifice everything he had built to ensure those who betrayed him would gain nothing from their treachery. The last piece of his preparation involved a safety deposit box at First Meridian Bank containing evidence he had gathered over the years, evidence that would destroy anyone who tried to destroy him. He had visited it one last time yesterday, ensuring everything was in order. Now, as his birthday approached, Morris simply waited for his family to make their move. Morris arrived home on his 50th birthday to find the house unusually quiet. Loretta had mentioned a special dinner, but there were no signs of preparation in the kitchen. "Miss Abernathy," he called out for the housekeeper, but received no answer. He found a note on the kitchen counter. "Miss Abernathy has been given the day off. See you at 7 for your birthday dinner." L. Morris checked his watch. 6:30 p.m. He had half an hour before whatever they had planned would unfold. He climbed the stairs to their bedroom, finding Loretta applying makeup at her vanity. "You're home early," she said, meeting his eyes in the mirror. "Thought I'd change before dinner," he replied. She smiled tightly. "The children are very excited." "Are they?" Morris asked, opening his closet to select a fresh shirt. "Quinn didn't seem particularly enthused about family time when I spoke to him last week." "Well, tonight is special," Loretta said, standing and smoothing her dress. A new one, he noticed, expensive and carefully chosen. "It's not every day their father turns 50. Morris nodded and headed to the bathroom to shower. Under the pounding water, he mentally reviewed his preparations. His go-bag was in his car trunk. Cash, alternate identification, essential items. His most critical digital assets had been transferred to secure servers. Protocol Zero was ready to activate with a single phone call. At precisely 7 p.m., Morris descended the stairs to find his family assembled in the dining room. The scene was meticulously staged. A small cake, wrapped presents, champagne cooling in a bucket. His children wore expressions of poorly concealed anticipation. "Happy birthday, darling," Loretta said, kissing his cheek with cold lips. They ate the catered meal in strange silence, broken only by artificial attempts at conversation. When the cake was served, chocolate, not the lemon he preferred, Loretta nodded to Bridget, who produced the first envelope. "Before dessert, we have something for you," she said, sliding it across the table. Morris opened it slowly, already knowing what he would find. The divorce papers were comprehensive, clearly prepared by someone who knew exactly how to dismantle a high-net-worth marriage in the most advantageous way for Loretta. 25 years, Loretta said, watching him. "I think that's enough, don't you?" Before Morris could respond, Quinn placed the second envelope beside his plate. "This one's from us, Dad." The property transfer documents were expertly crafted, with his forged signature on every page. Morris recognized Bridget's legal expertise in the meticulous details. They had transferred everything: the Westchester home, the Florida condo, the cabin in Vermont, even the small apartment he kept in the city for late work nights. "Your signature is on the transfer," Bridget explained with professional detachment. "The house and properties are all in our names now." Morris turned to Quinn. "And you're part of this?" Quinn wouldn't meet his eyes. "You always said I needed to learn about the real world. Well, this is it." The third envelope contained the eviction notice, effective immediately, though legally giving him 30 days. Loretta's eyes gleamed with triumph as she placed it before him. "We'd prefer if you left tonight," she said. "Make it a clean break. It's ours now, legally. Get out." Bridget couldn't contain her excitement, a lifetime of resentment bubbling to the surface. "Happy birthday, loser." Morris looked at each of them in turn, his wife, daughter, and son. He had given them everything, and this was their response. The cold rage he felt was tempered by something else, a strange sense of vindication. He had been right to prepare. He nodded once. "Understood," he replied. The simplicity of his response seemed to unnerve them. They had expected anger, pleading, perhaps even threats. His calm acceptance was clearly not in their script. Morris stood, pushed in his chair, and walked to the entryway. He took his coat from the closet and his keys from the silver dish. "That's it?" Loretta called after him. "You're just leaving?" Morris turned back. "Isn't that what you want?" "Well, yes, but—" She seemed at a loss for words. "Then, yes, I'm leaving," Morris replied. "Goodbye, Loretta." Outside, he stood in the cool evening air and removed his phone. He dialed the number he had memorized years ago. "Terrence," he said when his friend answered. "It's happening. Initiate Protocol 0. "You're sure?" Terrence asked. "I'm sure," Morris confirmed. "It'll take about a week to fully deploy," Terrence warned. "Once it starts, there's no stopping it." "Good," Morris said. "That's exactly what I want." He ended the call, got into his car, and drove away without a backward glance. As the estate disappeared in his rearview mirror, Morris felt a strange sense of liberation. They thought they had taken everything from him, but in reality, they had simply freed him from any remaining obligation to them. They would learn soon enough that Morris Blackwell never lost a game of chess. He was always several moves ahead, and they had just walked into his most elaborate trap yet. The safe house in rural Pennsylvania had stood empty for years, maintained by a property management company with no connection to Morris. It was one of several properties he owned through shell corporations, properties his family knew nothing about. Morris settled into the modest cabin, listening to the sounds of the forest outside. The isolation suited his purpose. He needed to focus completely on what was coming next. On his secure laptop, Morris reviewed the progress of Protocol 0. Terrence had already initiated the first phase, the silent transfer of Riverstone Industries' most valuable assets to a separate holding company Morris had established years earlier. These weren't physical assets that would be missed immediately, but intellectual property, client relationships, and key personnel who were loyal to Morris personally. Morris picked up a worn photograph from his go bag, the only personal item he had brought with him. It showed a young man in military uniform standing next to 3 others, all wearing the distinctive patches of a specialized unit few civilians would recognize. Before Morris Blackwell built security empires and married socialites, he had been Lieutenant Michael Brennan, a member of an elite military intelligence unit specializing in psychological operations and strategic disruption. His team's job had been to destabilize hostile organizations without leaving evidence of outside interference, making systems collapse from within. He had legally changed his name after leaving the service, burying his past so deeply that even Loretta didn't know the full truth. She had married Morris Blackwell, the successful security consultant, turning his expertise into a business. She never knew Michael Brennan, the man trained to dismantle organizations and lives with surgical precision. Only Terrence knew the truth. They had served together, survived together, and when they returned to civilian life, they promised to watch each other's backs. When Morris started Riverstone, Terrence was his first hire. Morris opened a secure messaging app and typed a status update. Terrence's reply came seconds later. Phase 1 complete. Key personnel relocated. Client migration underway. Drummond taking the bait. Morris nodded to himself. Franklin Drummond thought he was about to acquire a thriving security firm, not realizing the shell he was purchasing had been systematically hollowed out. By the time the acquisition was complete, Riverstone would be nothing but an empty husk with liabilities carefully hidden in the corporate structure. His phone buzzed with another message from Terrence. Your family is celebrating. Champagne delivered to the house this afternoon. Morris felt the cold anger solidify in his chest. Let them celebrate. They had no idea what was coming. He turned to another screen displaying surveillance feeds from cameras hidden throughout his former home. Cameras Loretta and the children never knew existed. He watched as they toured the house. Loretta already planning renovations. Bridget claiming his study as her new home office. Quinn exploring the wine cellar and selecting bottles from Morris's carefully curated collection. Morris's attention shifted to a third screen showing financial data. His personal accounts, the ones Loretta knew about, had already been drained. He had expected this. What she didn't know was that those accounts contained less than 5% of his actual wealth. The rest was secured in ways that would be impossible for her to access or even discover. As night fell, Morris reviewed the comprehensive dossiers he had compiled on everyone involved in the betrayal, not just his family, but the peripheral players as well. Drummond, the lawyers Loretta had hired, even the bank officials who had helped facilitate the fraudulent transfers. Each file contained vulnerabilities, pressure points, secrets. Morris had spent decades in the security business, and information was his true currency. People revealed themselves in countless ways they never realized, and Morris had been watching, listening, and recording. He opened Loretta's file first. Their marriage had been a calculated decision on both sides. She gained financial security and social standing. He gained a partner who understood the demands of his work and could manage their social obligations. For years, it had been an effective partnership, if not a passionate love match. But Loretta had grown resentful as she aged, watching younger women at their social events, feeling time slipping away. Her affair with Drummond had begun 3 years ago, not out of passion, but from opportunity. She saw in him a way out, one that would allow her to keep her lifestyle intact. Bridget's file revealed a daughter who had always felt overshadowed by her father's success. Her legal career was chosen specifically to gain power over him, to acquire knowledge she could use against him. The psychological evaluation Morris had secretly commissioned when she was in college identified narcissistic tendencies and a profound sense of entitlement. Quinn's file was thinner. The boy was a follower, not a leader. He had been drawn into the conspiracy by his mother and sister rather than driving it himself. His weakness was his desire for approval, first from Morris, and then, when that seemed unattainable, from Loretta and Bridget. Morris closed the files and leaned back in his chair. Protocol Zero wasn't just about protecting his assets. It was about justice. Each person would face consequences proportional to their betrayal. He picked up a physical chessboard, setting up the pieces. White for him, black for them. He moved a white pawn forward, beginning the game. Your move, he murmured to the empty room. 3 days after leaving his home, Morris watched through remote access as Franklin Drummond entered Riverstone Industries headquarters for the first official meeting as its pending owner. The company's senior management, those not loyal to Morris, greeted him with the appropriate deference. The meeting room was prepared with detailed presentations about the company's operations, client base, and financials, all carefully curated to show exactly what Drummond expected to see. What no one in that room knew was that as they spoke, Terrence was orchestrating the second phase of Protocol Zero. The most valuable clients of Riverstone were being personally contacted by trusted team members with an offer to transfer their security contracts to a new company, Phoenix Sentinel, at preferential rates. Given the relationships Morris had built over decades, most were agreeing without hesitation. Meanwhile, crucial operational data was being systematically altered in Riverstone systems. Nothing obvious. Subtle changes to client requirements, security protocols, and personnel assignments that would only become apparent in the coming weeks, creating a cascade of service failures that would be impossible to trace to a single cause. Morris shifted his attention to his family. Through the home surveillance system, he observed Loretta on the phone with her interior designer, discussing renovations to her house now that she finally had control. Bridget was in his former study, boxing up his personal items, chess sets, books, and awards with casual disregard. Quinn was mostly absent, having returned to college with a new car purchased, using a credit card still linked to Morris's name. Morris opened his laptop and sent an encrypted message to Terrence. Initiate Phase 3. The response came immediately. Confirmed. With a slight smile, Morris reset the white pawn on his chessboard, anticipation building for the next move in his carefully planned endgame. Timeline: 24 hours. Phase 3 was where the consequences would begin to materialize. Morris closed his laptop and drove to the nearest town, 30 minutes from his cabin. At the local diner, he sat at the counter and ordered coffee, opening a burner phone to check non-sensitive messages. There were already 27 missed calls from Loretta, Bridget, and Quinn, plus numerous text messages ranging from confused to angry. None of them had expected him to simply disappear without a fight. Morris ignored them all, scrolling instead to messages from his network, former military contacts, security professionals, and other specialists who owed him favors. Everything was in motion. As he sipped his coffee, the waitress turned up the small television mounted in the corner. A breaking news story showed Franklin Drummond being escorted from his office building by federal agents. Allegations of securities fraud and corporate espionage, the reporter was saying. Sources close to the investigation report that evidence was provided anonymously to the SEC and FBI earlier this week. Morris allowed himself a small smile. The evidence in question, documentation of Drummond's numerous illegal activities over the years, had been compiled in a secure file for precisely this purpose. The timing of its release to authorities was no coincidence. Back at the cabin, Morris checked the financial markets. Drummond Securities was in free fall, its stock dropping by the minute as news of the CEO's arrest spread. By market close, the company had lost 60% of its value. Morris's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, one of his contacts at Thorndike and Wyatt, the law firm where Bridget worked. Package delivered as requested. Effects immediate. Within an hour, his surveillance system captured Bridget receiving a call that left her ashen-faced. Morris didn't need audio to understand what had happened. The senior partners at her firm had just learned of her involvement in document forgery and fraud, anonymous evidence having appeared on their desks that morning. Her career, barely begun, was effectively over. No law firm would touch her after this, not with a potential disbarment looming. That evening, as Morris prepared a simple dinner in the cabin, his secure phone rang. "Is this really necessary, Morris?" Terrence asked without preamble. "The kids, too. They made their choice," Morris replied, his voice flat. Actions have consequences. Bridget just lost her job, Terrence continued. Quinn's been expelled. The university received evidence that he cheated his way through his degree. Did he? Yes, Terrence admitted. But still, they tried to take everything from me. Morris cut him off. Not just material things, my dignity, my legacy. They laughed while doing it. Terrence was silent for a moment. Loretta is getting desperate. She's trying to access accounts, finding them empty. Drummond's lawyer won't take her calls now that he's facing charges. The house has 3 mortgages against it that she didn't know about. Those mortgages don't exist, Morris said, but the paperwork looks convincing enough that it will take months to unravel. She's calling everyone trying to find you. Let her search, Morris replied. Phase 4 begins tomorrow. After ending the call, Morris returned to his chessboard. He moved another piece, a knight this time, positioning it for a fork that would threaten 2 black pieces simultaneously on his next move. Tomorrow, Loretta would discover that her social standing, the thing she valued above all else, was about to crumble. The carefully crafted identity she had built over 25 years would be revealed as a fabrication. Morris picked up the black queen, examining it before placing it back on the board. In chess, the queen was the most powerful piece, but even queens could be trapped by careful strategy. On the 5th day of his self-imposed exile, Morris drove to a small private airfield where a nondescript jet waited. The pilot, a former military colleague, asked no questions as Morris boarded with his minimal luggage. 3 hours later, they landed in Chicago, where Morris checked into the penthouse suite of an exclusive hotel under one of his alternate identities. From this temporary command center, he would oversee the final phases of Protocol 0. Morris set up his secure equipment and connected to his network. Status reports flooded in. Riverstone Industries was in chaos, with key personnel gone and client complaints mounting. The company was hemorrhaging value by the hour. The pending sale to Drummond Securities was suspended indefinitely, with Drummond himself released on bail, but facing multiple federal charges. Bridget had been placed on administrative leave while the law firm investigated the allegations against her. Her apartment, purchased with Morris's money but transferred to her name 3 months earlier, now had a lien against it, based on documentation suggesting she had used it as collateral for a loan she never actually received. Quinn had returned home from college in disgrace, his academic credentials under review and his new car repossessed due to payment irregularities. And Loretta? Loretta was finally beginning to understand the true scope of her situation. The society friends she had cultivated over decades were suddenly unavailable, their calls unreturned. The credit cards she depended on were being declined. The house staff had resigned en masse after receiving generous job offers elsewhere. Morris opened his laptop to review the final element of his plan, the complete digital record of Loretta's affair with Drummond, including communications plotting the takeover of Riverstone and the scheme to deprive Morris of his assets. This information was set to be released to specific individuals the following day, unless Morris countermanded the order. His phone rang, a number he didn't recognize. "Hello, Michael," said a voice he hadn't heard in many years. Morris froze. No one had called him by that name in over 2 decades. "Colonel Winters," he replied after a moment. "It's been a long time." "Indeed it has," the older man agreed. "I'm calling because some interesting patterns have come to my attention. Patterns that remind me of operations we ran in another life." "I'm retired, Colonel." "Of course," Winters said. "But old habits die hard, don't they? Particularly when one feels cornered." Morris said nothing. "I won't ask what happened," Winters continued. "But whatever it was, I suspect your response might be disproportionate. You always did have a tendency to be thorough. Is there a point to this call? Morris asked. Consider it a professional courtesy, Winters replied. Whatever you're doing has ripples. Not big enough for most to notice, but I still have sensors in place. You might want to consider whether complete destruction is truly necessary. After the call ended, Morris stood at the window overlooking the Chicago skyline, considering Winters's words. Was he going too far? The original Protocol Zero had been designed as a scorched earth response, total destruction of everyone involved in the betrayal. His phone buzzed with a text from Terrence. 51 missed calls from your family today. Loretta trying to liquidate jewelry. Bridget contacted legal aid. Quinn attempted suicide. Morris felt a moment of genuine shock at the last item. Status, he texted back. Hospital. Stable. Stomach pumped. Morris closed his eyes. Quinn had always been the weakest of them, following his mother and sister's lead rather than driving the betrayal himself. The boy had made terrible choices, but Morris had never intended this outcome. After a moment of consideration, Morris sent another message. Modify Protocol Zero. Tier 2 for Quinn only. The response came quickly. Confirmed. Reducing severity for Quinn. Others proceed as planned. Morris stared at the message for a long time before replying. Yes, continue as planned for Loretta and Bridget. He returned to the chessboard he had set up in the suite, studying the positions. In the modified game state, he moved the Black Knight, representing Quinn, to the edge of the board, away from the main conflict. The boy would face consequences, but would be spared the worst of what was coming. The Black Queen and remaining Knight, however, remained in the center of the board, vulnerable to the approaching white pieces. Loretta and Bridget had been the architects of this betrayal. Their punishment would continue as planned. Morris picked up the White Queen, the most versatile and powerful piece on the board, and positioned it for the final attack. Tomorrow would mark 1 week since his birthday, since they had laughed while destroying his life. Tomorrow the last phase would begin, and their desperate calls would be answered at last. As night fell over Chicago, Morris sent one final message to Terrence. They're going to arrest them, Terrence said without preamble when Morris answered. That was the plan, Morris replied calmly. Fraud charges, conspiracy, attempted theft. They're looking at serious time, Morris, Terrence pressed, especially Bridget, given her legal background. The DA sees this as a career-making case. Morris watched the police cars reach the house, each screen playing out the meticulously orchestrated fallout of the betrayal. He felt no pang of regret. They made their choices. And what about Quinn? Morris glanced at the fourth monitor, the hospital room where Quinn lay in fragile silence, watched over by a competent and compassionate staff. Quinn is off limits to the authorities, Morris said. No one will press charges related to his involvement. The only thing he'll be facing is the truth about his own actions, and the work ahead to rebuild his life. He could hear relief in Terrence's voice, even through the static of the secure line. Understood. I'll make sure Quinn's name stays clear. Thank you, Morris answered. Down on the news feed, the camera panned in on the grand front door of the Westchester estate, just as officers began knocking, firm, insistent, the kind of knock no one could ignore. Moments later, the door opened. In the harsh sunlight, Loretta and Bridget appeared together, faces blanched, their confident postures gone. The police spoke briefly, then handcuffed both women in full view of the neighbors and local press. Morris watched as everything they had valued, their reputation, their friends, their illusion of control, was stripped away in an instant. "He's excluded from the evidence," Morris said as agreed. There was silence on the line for a moment. "It's not too late to pull back," Terrence finally said. "You've made your point. They're ruined financially. Their reputations are destroyed. Is prison really necessary?" Morris observed the officers approaching his front door on the security feed. "Would they have shown me mercy?" "Probably not," Terrence admitted. "But you're not them." The words hung in the air between them. On screen, Loretta opened the door to the officers, her face shifting from irritation to confusion to fear as they explained why they were there. "I need to think," Morris said, ending the call. He watched as the officers entered his home, speaking to Loretta and then making a call, presumably to get instructions regarding Bridget, who had arrived at the house the previous day after being locked out of her apartment. Morris opened his laptop and accessed a secure server containing the final contingency of Protocol 0, a command that would halt certain processes and withdraw some of the evidence provided to authorities. If executed within the next hour, it would significantly reduce the legal jeopardy facing Loretta and Bridget, potentially transforming criminal charges into civil matters. His finger hovered over the key that would initiate this command. Was Terrence right? Had he gone too far? Morris thought back to his birthday dinner, the cold calculation in Loretta's eyes, the cruel triumph in Bridget's laugh, the weak compliance in Quinn's averted gaze. They had planned for months to strip him of everything, to humiliate him on a day that should have been a celebration. "Happy birthday, loser," Bridget had said. Morris's hand moved away from the keyboard. No, they had made their choices, knowing the potential consequences. Now they would face them. On screen, he watched as officers escorted Loretta from the house in handcuffs, reading her rights as news vans began arriving at the base of the driveway, alerted by anonymous tips about the arrest of the wife of prominent businessman Morris Blackwell. His phone rang again, this time a number he recognized. He answered. "Colonel," he said. "It's done then," Winters stated rather than asked. "Almost," Morris replied. "And after, when everyone who betrayed you has been punished." "What then, Michael?" It was a question Morris hadn't allowed himself to consider. Protocol 0 had consumed his planning for so long that he had focused solely on execution, not aftermath. "I don't know," he admitted. "That's the problem with scorched earth," Winters said quietly. "Nothing grows afterward." After they hung up, Morris stood at the window overlooking Chicago, considering Winters's words. The old man had a point. Morris had destroyed his betrayers, but in doing so, he had also destroyed his old life. There would be no returning to who he had been before. Perhaps that was fitting. The lesson of chess, of life, was that every sacrifice changed the board forever. Game over meant a new game would eventually begin. Morris Blackwell had been created as a persona, a cover for Michael Brennan to build a normal life. Now that normal life had proven as fictional as the name itself. On screen, he watched as Bridget was led from the house in handcuffs, her face contorted with rage and fear. The reporters surged forward, cameras flashing. Morris closed the laptop. It was done. The arrest of Loretta and Bridget Blackwell dominated the evening news cycle. The story had everything: wealth, betrayal, forgery, and the mysterious disappearance of business mogul Morris Blackwell, following what was now being characterized as an elaborate conspiracy against him. Morris watched the coverage from his hotel suite, observing how the narrative was already forming. Successful businessman betrayed by greedy wife and daughter, now fighting for his reputation and assets. The evidence he had provided through untraceable channels was being described by legal analysts as overwhelming and meticulously documented. His secure phone rang repeatedly, not from his family this time, but from business associates, friends, even reporters somehow obtaining his private number. He ignored them all. Only when Terrence called did he answer. "They're processing Loretta and Bridget now," Terrence reported. "Bail hearing tomorrow, but with the flight risk and the serious nature of the charges, it's unlikely they'll be released." "And Quinn?" Morris asked. "Still in the hospital. The psychiatric hold has been extended for his protection." Morris nodded to himself. "Any movement on the financial front?" "The emergency injunction you filed through your lawyers has frozen all the property transfers," Terrence explained. "The court appointed a receiver for Riverstone this afternoon, pending resolution of the criminal cases. And Drummond, he's looking at 20 years minimum. His lawyers are already floating cooperation deals, offering to testify against Loretta." Morris absorbed this information in silence. His revenge was playing out exactly as planned, more effectively than he had dared hope. In fact, the systematic dismantling of his betrayers was nearly complete. Yet, he felt hollow. "The calls," Morris said suddenly. "The desperate calls referenced in Protocol 0. Have they started?" "Yes," Terrence confirmed. "Your personal phone has 51 missed calls since the arrests, mainly from lawyers, but also from several unknown numbers traced back to detention facilities. Loretta and Bridget trying to reach you through the inmate phone system." 51 desperate calls, just as he had predicted when he walked out of his home a week ago. They had come sooner than his family expected, because his revenge had moved with a swiftness and thoroughness they couldn't have anticipated. "What are they saying?" Morris asked about the messages. Terrence hesitated. "Mostly what you'd expect. Denial at first, then anger, now bargaining. Loretta's offering to sign confession documents, taking full responsibility if you'll help Bridget. Bridget's claiming she was manipulated by her mother and Drummond, and they expect me to believe that after everything? I think they're desperate enough to try anything," Terrence replied. "The reality of their situation is sinking in. Prison time, financial ruin, social ostracism, everything they valued, gone." Morris turned to the chessboard, studying the positions. His strategy had succeeded brilliantly. The Black Queen and Knight were trapped with no legal moves remaining. Checkmate was inevitable, yet victory felt strangely unsatisfying. "What would you do?" Morris asked suddenly. "If you were in my position now?" Terrence was silent for a long moment. "I remember what we learned in our unit, that the objective isn't always complete destruction. Sometimes it's securing just enough leverage to ensure your safety going forward." "They tried to destroy me completely," Morris pointed out. "Yes," Terrence agreed. "And they failed because you were prepared. They weren't prepared for your response. The question is whether total destruction serves your interests now, or whether keeping them in a position of manageable vulnerability might be more useful." After the call ended, Morris poured himself a drink and considered Terrence's perspective. His friend wasn't suggesting forgiveness. They both knew that was impossible after such betrayal. But there was a pragmatic argument for calibrating the punishment to maintain some utility in the aftermath. His phone buzzed with a notification. A voicemail from an unknown number. Against his better judgment, Morris played it. "Dad." Quinn's voice was weak, barely audible. "They told me what happened, what Mom and Bridget did, what I helped them do." A long pause filled with shaky breathing. "I didn't understand what we were really doing. That's not an excuse. Just, if you're listening, I'm sorry." Morris deleted the message, his face impassive. Quinn had been the least culpable, a follower manipulated by stronger personalities, but he had still chosen to participate in the betrayal. Another notification appeared, an email from Beatrice Wells, his CFO at Riverstone. The subject line read, "Next steps." Morris opened it to find a brief message. "Whatever happened with your family, the company still needs leadership. The team is scattered but intact. Ready when you are." It was a reminder that not everything in his life had been destroyed. Parts of what he had built remained viable, waiting for direction. Morris returned to the chessboard, studying it intently. Then, slowly, deliberately, he reset the pieces to their starting positions. The game was over. He had won. Now, it was time to decide what victory would look like. 2 days later, Morris Blackwell walked into the federal detention center, where Loretta and Bridget were being held, pending their bail hearing. He had shaved his beard, cut his hair short, and wore an expensive suit that emphasized his athletic build. "You will serve time, but it will be significantly reduced. 5 years, perhaps less, with good behavior. And when you're released, you'll have nothing. No money, no home, no social standing. You'll be starting from scratch, if that." "5 years?" Loretta whispered, her face pale. "Is that all?" Bridget asked, her voice laced with bitterness. "After everything we've done, you're giving us a chance to walk away with our lives?" Morris's expression didn't change. "You should be grateful. The alternative is far worse." Loretta looked at the document, her hands trembling slightly. "And if we refuse? Then I'll provide the prosecution with every piece of evidence I have," Morris said coldly. "And I'll make sure they know exactly how deeply involved you both were. You'll face the maximum sentence, and I'll make certain that every detail of your betrayal becomes public knowledge." Bridget's eyes narrowed. "You're bluffing. You won't do that to your own family." Morris leaned back in his chair, his voice steady. "I already have. By walking away and letting you believe you had won. By setting this all in motion. I've shown you exactly what I'm capable of. Don't test me again." The room fell silent, the weight of Morris's words hanging heavy in the air. Loretta looked at Bridget, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and desperation. Bridget, despite her tough exterior, seemed to waver. "Fine," Bridget said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "We'll sign." Loretta nodded, her eyes downcast. "Yes, we'll sign." Morris pushed the document closer to them. "Good. Then let's get this over with." He watched as they signed the papers, their hands shaking slightly. As they finished, he gathered the documents and stood up. "I'll make sure these are filed with the court. Your lawyers will be in touch with the details." With that, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving Loretta and Bridget alone with their thoughts. The guard escorted him out, the heavy door closing behind him with a finality that echoed through the stark hallway. Outside, Morris took a deep breath, the cool air a stark contrast to the tension-filled room he had just left. He knew that this was far from over, but for now, he had secured a measure of justice. The game was far from over, but he had made his move. Based on his comments, that likely means 5 years instead of 15 with the potential for earlier parole. "That's still prison time," Bridget protested. "Yes," Morris agreed, his voice hardening. "Actions have consequences, Bridget. You're a lawyer, or were. You knew exactly what you were doing when you forged those documents." "And Quinn?" Loretta asked. "What happens to him?" "Quinn has his own agreement," Morris replied. "Contingent on completion of psychiatric treatment and community service. I'll ensure he can finish his education, though not in business. His aptitude clearly lies elsewhere." Bridget leaned forward. Why not just destroy us completely? You clearly could. Morris studied his daughter, seeing in her face echoes of his own calculating nature. Because total destruction is inefficient, he replied. This way, you serve as examples without consuming more of my resources than necessary. He stood, signaling that the meeting was concluding. You have 24 hours to decide. Your lawyers have copies of the agreements. Think carefully. As he turned to leave, Loretta spoke again. Morris, wait. Her voice cracked with emotion. Was any of it real? Our marriage? The life we built? Morris paused at the door. Parts of it, he admitted, but not enough to prevent this outcome. He left without looking back, nodding to the guard as he passed. Outside the detention center, Terrence waited beside a black SUV. How did it go? He asked as Morris approached. As expected, Morris replied. They'll sign. They have no alternative. And then it's finished, Morris said. They pay for their betrayal with prison time and financial ruin. I recover my assets and move forward. Terrence nodded, opening the vehicle door. Where to now? The hospital, Morris answered. I need to see Quinn before I leave. The visit to his son was brief and uncomfortable. Quinn, still under medical supervision, alternated between tearful apologies and resigned acceptance of his role in the conspiracy. Morris listened without expression, then outlined the terms of their future relationship. Conditional support dependent on Quinn's commitment to rehabilitation and honest living. Will you ever forgive me? Quinn asked as Morris prepared to leave. Morris paused. No, he said simply. But I'm willing to allow you the opportunity to build something new. Don't mistake that for forgiveness. His final stop was Riverstone Industries headquarters, where he met with the core team that had remained loyal through Terrence's careful management. They gathered in the conference room, uncertain but hopeful, as Morris entered. As you know, recent events have necessitated significant changes, Morris began. Riverstone Industries as it existed is effectively gone. Murmurs of concern spread through the room. However, Morris continued, Phoenix Sentinel is now operational, with most of our key clients already transferred. Those of you in this room have demonstrated loyalty under difficult circumstances. You'll all have positions in the new company, with improved compensation packages to reflect that loyalty. Relief washed over the assembled faces. We begin operations officially next week, Morris concluded. Until then, finish transferring any remaining viable assets from Riverstone and prepare for our new beginning. Later that evening, Morris sat alone in his hotel suite, a chessboard before him, with pieces arranged in the final position of a complex game. He moved the white king forward, capturing the last black piece, a symbolic conclusion to the conflict. His phone buzzed with a message from Terrence. Agreement signed. DA confirming reduced sentencing recommendations. Morris closed his eyes briefly. It was done. His family had betrayed him, attempted to strip him of everything he had built, and laughed while doing it. Now they understood the consequences of challenging a man who had spent his life preparing for betrayal. He had lost his marriage, but it had been hollow for years. He had lost his home, but it had never truly felt like one. He had lost his children's love, but that had been based on false premises from the beginning. What remained was what mattered. His core business, his loyal people, his carefully hidden wealth, and most importantly, his self-respect. He had neither begged nor broken when confronted with betrayal. He had responded with calculated precision, ensuring those who betrayed him gained nothing from their treachery. Morris packed away the chess set, each piece finding its place in the velvet-lined case, The game was over. He had won, though the victory tasted more like ashes than triumph. Tomorrow, he would fly to an undisclosed location to begin building his new life, one without the vulnerabilities he had allowed himself in the past. Phoenix Sentinel would rise from Riverstone's ashes, stronger and more secure, and Morris Blackwell, or perhaps Michael Brennan once again, would continue forward, alone, but undefeated. He had given his family everything, only to have them attempt to take everything from him in return. Their betrayal had freed him from any obligation to them, any sentiment that might have softened his response. The final checkmate was complete. The king still stood, while all who had opposed him lay vanquished on the board. "Happy birthday to me," Morris murmured to the empty room and closed the chess case with a decisive click.